Hello everyone and welcome to the Hidden Lives of Writers. I'm Fiona Snyckers and I'm joined by Gail Schimmel.
Hello Fiona.
Hi Gail, how has your writing week been?
Fiona, it's been interesting because I had a spurt of efficiency this week and I had a whole lot of things that had to be done that I wasn't getting to. So I finished editing the Katie Gail, the round of edits I was supposed to do, finished them and got them off almost a month earlier than the deadline. And then you and I are working on something and I had a last little bit that I needed to do that I've been not getting to is a better word. And I was like, you're getting to this today. You do it. And I did it. And then I finished reading my rom-coms read through and realized that it's not actually finished. But yeah, I've had an efficient getting rid of the things that are standing between me and the real writing. And now I am standing in front of a vast ocean, not knowing how to start swimming in it. But there we go. How about you?
Sort of similar in a way. I've had a week that's been very busy and very demanding. 2 podcasts with guests, with a big body of work that takes a lot of concentration to get through, and also a book launch that where I was in discussion with the author, Penny Hoare, friend of the pod. We've had her on before. She's lovely. And it was such a pleasure to be in conversation with her for a book launch. And again, quite a body of work and a new book out. And it's just been busy and rewarding and very engaging kind of work. Not my writing work. It's kept me out of my writing work. But I like to think that this sort of engaging with other people's work will maybe feed me in a way and make my own writing better. Do you believe in that?
I know that the podcast does for me a lot, and I do love being the discussant at book launches. I feel like that's a way of giving back to the writing community in a sense. And I do think this is a thing that's not spoken about, that with a certain level of success, and I'm kind of saying that wryly when it comes to myself at the moment, but anyway, with a certain level of success in writing comes a whole lot of things that you hadn't really pictured as being part of the writing life, like being on panels, hosting panels, doing that kind of thing. I mean, nobody forced us to do a podcast, but it is a thing that a lot of writers find themselves doing, something like this in the writing adjacent space.
Yes.
And it's a part of the job that you maybe don't necessarily sign up for. And I know some people hate, but I think both you and I don't. Well, we wouldn't be sitting here if we hated it. We clearly like it.
We do like it, yes. And I do think it feeds one's creativity. So just as you have cleared the decks and are ready to get into the serious writing, I have too, in a way. It's been a busy week. It's coming to an end now, and I'm also teetering on the brink of having to plunge into something that's scaring me slightly. So, and in the meantime, what have you been reading or watching or listening to lately?
So, as you know, I love podcasts, and one of the podcasts I love is The Moth. And The Moth is a storytelling platform. It has a podcast, but it also has live events all over the world. And it's people's everyday stories, and it's about 10-minute stories. And the thing about The Moth is they do main stage events where you have prepared stories where they've been trained by the Moth people. And you also have story slams where people just stand up and tell stories. And I love listening to them. And last night I went to a live event in Johannesburg. It's the second one that's happened in Johannesburg. The first one, I wasn't into The Moth then. Didn't know why people were excited about it. Now I was like, absolutely. It really was a bucket list event for me. And it was hosted by Lebo Mashile, who is absolutely amazing.
I know Lebo, yes.
Her energy was fantastic. So I was worried that it was going to be, I think we all do this thing where we worry that South Africa's not going to deliver in the way international things deliver, that we're not going to be as slick and smooth and the stories won't be as good, and we kind of downplay ourselves. Lebo was amazing. The energy was amazing. The stories were amazing. And the thing that you know when you listen to the pod that one of the things about it is the storytellers don't have notes. They have to tell the story out of their heads.
Wow.
And you know that theoretically when you're listening to the pod. But when you see it in real life, you realize actually how challenging that is, that it's a really big thing. And I think maybe it by coincidence was the same day that my son was doing his matric English oral, which obviously is very much with cards.
Yes.
And so I had that juxtaposition in my head of speeches with cue cards and speeches without cue cards. And while I've always thought listening to the pod, I'm pretty confident I could do a 10-minute speech without cue cards. Seeing those people do it, it's hectic. It's really hectic, but it was amazing. It was just an amazing experience. What an amazing podcast. If you love stories and you don't listen to that, you should start. What about you, Fiona? What have you been reading, watching, absorbing?
I have been watching. I took a leaf out of David Cornwell's book. When he was on our podcast, he mentioned that he'd watched Begonia, which was one of the Oscar movies this year. So I went home and watched Begonia with Emma Stone, and it was extremely interesting, extremely good. It alerted me to something that I've been vaguely noticing lately, that the horror movie space has become high cinema all of a sudden, where some really interesting ideas are being explored.
Okay.
And Begonia features Emma Stone as a sort of girl boss CEO of some incredibly exploitative company. And these two semi-incel, conspiracy-minded guys get together and decide to kidnap her because they are convinced that she is an alien queen from the Andromeda galaxy.
Obviously.
And needs to be stopped.
Okay.
And it goes from there. It is excellent.
How horrible? Like, is it blood and guts and gore and torture?
It isn't. I was about 2/3 of the way through the movie when I suddenly went, ooh, goodness, is this, am I watching horror?
Okay.
It's a couple of moments of visceral wince and cringe, but I do believe it is classified as a horror movie. But it's only isolated moments, and the rest of it is very interesting, cerebral, fascinating, exploring some really contemporary and interesting ideas. So I recommend Begonia.
Sounds worth a watch.
It definitely is. And somebody whose books, plays, poems, and art are definitely worth a watch and a read is our guest today. Our guest today is Zakes Mda. Zakes is an author, a playwright, a poet, and an artist. He is the winner of the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, the Sunday Times Literary Award. He was awarded the Order of Ikhamanga Silver Award as a Lifetime Achievement Award. His list of works is very long, and I'm only going to hit some highlights. He's the author of Ways of Dying, which was published in 1995, The Heart of Redness, 2000, We Shall Sing for the Fatherland, Little Sons, The Madonna of Excelsior, the play And the Girls in Their Sunday Dresses, which is being performed currently or has very recently been performed again. Zakes is a Professor Emeritus at Ohio University. He is a premier man of letters in South Africa. We are so thrilled and honored to have you in the studio with us. Hi, Zakes, and welcome.
Oh, hello, Fiona. Hello, Gail.
This has been one of those ones that we are just, we're a bit nervous, to be honest with you. And I have to tell you.
I'm nervous too.
When I left to do the pod this morning, when I leave, I have a day job that's not with writing people, and they very seldom know when I drop a name and say, this is who I'm going to interview. They normally look at me blankly. And when I said, I'm going to interview Zakes Mda, everyone went, ooh.
Oh.
So really, this is a very exciting interview for us, but that doesn't mean that we don't start in the place that we start with everyone.
Okay.
Zakes, how has your writing week been?
Well, I don't know if I've had much of a writing week, really, because I've been painting quite a lot lately. So I've had more of a painting week than a writing week. And this happens quite often after I finished a body of work, of writing work.
Mm-hmm.
Then painting becomes a very essential break for me. I think about nothing else but the paintings that I'm doing during that period.
And then does it work the other way around? When you've been painting for a period, does a book start to build up and then you need to swap over?
Well, it doesn't start to build up at that time because, you see, I have a number of books that have built up over time and they all exist in my notebook. Whenever an idea comes, I jot it down. Quite often, I never know where it's going to go. There's no story for it. It's just an idea.
Okay.
It may be snatches of dialogue. It may be just, some symbol, some image. I put it down. I know that one day it's going to go into a story somewhere, a novel this time, and before it would have been a play as well.
And when you are in the thick of writing a novel or a play or a short story, what does your daily process look like?
My daily process is quite random, especially when, the early chapters of the book. It's quite random. I just write when I feel like. I don't have a daily routine. I write anywhere. I write at the train station or at the airport, in the airplane, in a restaurant, at home in the kitchen as I cook, or, in the early years, look after my babies. I'll be writing from time to time. So it happens like that until I get to maybe 2/3 of the novel. Then from there, you see, there's that, I write every day, say from 6 a.m. to 6 p.m. with just that 1 hour break.
Mm-hmm.
Because at that time now, my story has taken shape and something pushes me, to continue and take it to the finishing line.
And are you writing on a device or longhand when you're in an airport or on a plane or at a train station?
And the cooking, because I'm fascinated that anyone can cook and write.
Longhand mostly, but also I may use a laptop. If I'm at the airport, for instance, and I have to wait maybe for 2-3 hours, I use a laptop. But normally, when I'm traveling, I write longhand, and then later I transfer that, onto the laptop.
Those ideas that you write down in that notebook, those little snippets of dialogue or whatever it is that comes to you, when they become a book, do you just sit down with that little snippet of an idea, or do you work out more of the book in your head? What I'm asking you really is, are you a plotter or are you a pantser? Do you plot your book or do you write by the seat of your pants?
Well, I'm some kind of a plotter, I think. Actually, I am a plotter. Yeah, because I'm trying to think and remember if I've had a book, that develops as I'm writing it. I don't remember any of my novels, developing like that. Usually, after some time of jotting down those notes, you see, and then an idea for a novel has come, then I go back to my notebook and I'm able then to have, my narrative curve, the traditional narrative curve, where then I know that this event comes here, that other event will be here, and so on and so forth. So I am a plotter, but I don't faithfully keep to that, because sometimes the story will decide to take another direction, you see. But in most instances, I won't digress very much, from, I know, for instance, by the time I'm at the middle, or that time when I say, okay, it's about 2/3 of the story, now I write every day. There I know exactly where I'm going and how the story is going to end.
So let's go back to young Zakes.
Yes.
Growing up, according to the internet, which is not always right, mostly in Soweto. You moved to Lesotho when your father went into exile.
Right.
You studied overseas.
Yes.
At what point did you know you were going to be a writer, and did you know what form that writing was going to take? Can you talk us through that?
Well, I knew at about, when I was 6 years old, that I wanted to tell stories. What happened in my case, growing up in Soweto, but my parents came from the Eastern Cape.
Mm-hmm.
In Soweto, what would happen then, I was an ardent comic book reader. I would buy comic books, and then I enjoyed reading comics, but I also enjoyed drawing.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought that's the kind of storytelling I like, using images and so on. And then during holidays in December, as was the tradition those days, we would go to the Eastern Cape to visit my grandmother, and my grandfather. And of course there, I encountered a different form of storytelling,
mm-hmm.
The traditional folk tale. And would find that all the children from different cities, in other words, the grandchildren, have come to visit, my grandparents. So we are all there. Some come from Cape Town, others come from Johannesburg and so on. Others, have lived there all their lives, in that Eastern Cape village. And of course, in the evenings then, those would be storytelling time. The stories from the oral tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And these are classical tales, that have been passed from one generation to the next, intact like that, you see. By intact, I mean that what the story is, who the characters are, where the story is going, how the story is going to resolve itself. So, we'll be exchanging such stories. These are stories we have heard from others before us, our grandparents, and so on. And of course, what would strike me about these stories is that they were quite magical. You would find that, for instance, there's one famous one where the mother has a daughter. The daughter is called Zilani. And then the mother has to go to work or has to go to get wood, for cooking from the forest or whatever. And then she would leave the girl alone, the child, lock the door. Don't you ever open for anybody. When I come, I'm going to sing this song. So there's a song that she sings. Then you will know that it's me. You can then open the door. So the mother left. Then an ogre came and sang, with a rough ogre voice. That's not my mother. She did not open the door. And then the ogre then went home to his ogre home and then took an axe and heated this axe until it was red hot and swallowed the axe. And then went back to Zilani. And then the voice now was mellifluous, was beautiful. And then he sang that song that the mother sings. And Tsilane thought, oh, that's my mother. Tsilane opened the door. The ogre grabbed Tsilane. You see? Now, when I look back at stories like those, we didn't ask, how is it possible for anybody to swallow an axe, let alone a red-hot axe, and for it not to damage or burn? We didn't ask any of those scientific questions. Mm-hmm. We took it for granted that in the world of Tsilane, things happen like that. You see? And so that kind of storytelling then, which came from the oral tradition, combined then with the literary storytelling that came from comic books, which also were accompanied by images and so on, came together and made this storyteller that I became. So those were my major influences. So it means that by the age of 6, 7 or so, I knew that I wanted to tell stories in the manner that my grandmother told them. But it is also in the manner that Casper the Ghost, Little Lotta, Spooky, and so on. You know, I wanted to combine all those forms of storytelling into my storytelling. That became my approach to it was influenced by all those different modes of storytelling. So what happened then was that the two important things when I was about 6 or 7 or so, that my father was a teacher then at a secondary school. He became a lawyer later. He went back to school and became a lawyer. But at that time, he was a teacher. And then I grew up surrounded by books, you know. And I was fascinated by books. I knew that I've got to write a book one day. Or I was thinking of a book, you know. And also, it so happened that at that time, a novel was published by an author called A.C. Jordan. A.C. Jordan is Paulo Jordan's father. Paulo Jordan, the guy who used to be a minister of something, I think sports and culture, or arts and culture, and so on. So his father wrote this novel titled Ingqumbo Yeminyanya. It was a Xhosa novel. And the novel was about my clan, Amampondomisa people, in the Eastern Cape. It was fiction, but it touched a lot on their traditions and their beliefs and so on. It's the kind of a story that was looking at traditional societies that were getting modernized, versus, a contemporary modern Eastern Cape of the time. And my father loved that novel. He was fascinated by it, mostly because it was about my people, my clan. And so when I was born, I think I was born in the same year as that novel. He named me after the main character of that novel. So my name, Zane Mvula, comes from the character of that novel by A.C. Jordan. It was later translated by the author himself into English, The Wrath of the Ancestors, by A.C. Jordan. So that's the first full-length novel that I ever read, which also, made me even much more enthusiastic about writing. And then it happened also at that time that there was a children's magazine that was published by the Department of Bantu Education, as it was called then, called Wamba. And it was published stories and so on. I thought, well, I would read those stories. So at that time then, by 7, 8, I began to dabble in story writing, or maybe writing some little poem here, a little story. My first story to be published in that magazine I was about 13 years old. And that's when I got my very first payment for writing something at 13. And it was 2 rands. 2 rands was a lot of money. A lot of money. You remember that during that period, a loaf of bread was 20 cents, you see. So I was very rich. I thought I was going to frame that 2 rands and it would be there forever, as my very first payment for something I wrote. But unfortunately, other needs I wrote. I don't remember what they were, but I suspect they would have to do with some comic book that I wanted to buy.
I love that.
Yeah, absolutely love that. You went on to leave South Africa and study overseas and live overseas, and I'm interested in how that happened for you, because it was unusual in those days that, we weren't as quick to leave the country except in exile. So can you talk us through how that all happened for you?
Yes, I was in exile already at that time.
With your parents?
With my parents.
Okay.
Because my exile in Lesotho was not for my own political sins. It was for my father's sins, you see. My father, who was one of the founders of the ANC Youth League, and actually became the president of the ANC Youth League, but in later years was known as the founding spirit of the PAC, the Pan-Africanist Congress, after they broke away from the ANC in 1959. So when he was arrested and was able to escape from prison, he crossed the river. In the Eastern Cape, we are very close to Lesotho, the borders of. So he crossed. The Lesotho at the time was a British colony. It was under, So, and went to Lesotho to become a refugee there. So when he had gone, I remained with my mother and my siblings. And then the police began now, to harass me. They would pick me up from school.
How old were you?
Oh, I was maybe 13. I think it's the same year that my story was published, in fact.
Okay.
So I was about 13 or so. They would, pick me up from school, take me to the police station to be interrogated and so on. So my mother thought, well, I better leave and join my father. So that's how my first exile, or my initial exile, happened, which means that I completed my primary school in exile already, and my high school. So it was after I'd finished my high school that I was a painter, I was an artist even then. And it happened that an artist from South Africa came to visit Lesotho, an artist called Walter Battis, with his kaftans. That's why I also wear kaftans. It was his influence. So Walter Battis came and we worked with him there, the young artist of Lesotho then. And he was very much impressed with my work. He was a member of what was called the International Institute of Arts and Letters in Switzerland. So he arranged, he recommended that I go over there to study art. So my first degree, in fact, is in fine arts, specializing in painting and with a minor in history of art from Zurich. So that's how I went over there for the first time.
Zakes, you've talked about your early exposure to oral storytelling.
Yes.
And I noticed that in at least 2 of your novels, Ways of Dying and The Madonna of Excelsior, you use a very unusual voice, the first person plural.
Right.
We notice this, we note that, we observe this, and you tell the story as a we, which some people have found very confusing and mystifying. But to me, it made me wonder whether oral tradition influenced that decision.
Well, I suspect so. I didn't even think about it that much because it sounded so natural, because who was telling the story? It's the voice of the gossip,
Yes.
Of the village gossip.
Yes.
We did this and this. Whoever that we is, we who are gossiping at that time about these events. It's a communal voice.
Yes.
And I thought, it's just a voice that seemed to work for that story. I didn't even think or agonize about it. I didn't know that it existed elsewhere until I read, some stories. Who's that writer, American writer, A Rose for Emily, who wrote that?
I'd need to look it up.
Yeah. A Rose for Emily is told in that communal voice. Mm-hmm. But I learned later when I was reading that, it's a voice that some writers have used, For me, it just sounded the most appropriate voice from a village gossip, because we always talk. When we who were observing these things that these characters were doing in our community, this and this happened, and we were amazed. How can anybody be doing things like this? How can this woman behave this way or this man behave this way? Because he did A, B, C, D, and E. We are already telling the story, but at the same time talking about the community attitude towards the activities of these characters. Yeah.
Fascinating.
I'm very interested in, you have a long creative life behind you and a long creative future ahead of you.
Hopefully.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested if you ever falter in it. You're consistently producing written works, and from the sounds of things, consistently painting. Does it ever dry up? Have you had patches where you've gone, maybe I'm done?
Well, it has happened that, not maybe I'm done, that I am done. Not because I've dried up. I have a whole list. I told you that I have a notebook, it's a huge book where I've written, there are 3 or 4 novels there. My next novel will come from that notebook. It's titled Rickshaw. That's what I'm researching now. I'll tell you more about it if you're interested. But the point that I'm making is that I decided after a novel titled The Zulus of New York, I decided that this is going to be my last novel. But it was not because I dried up. I still had notes there that could be novels. I was just tired of writing novels, and I was feeling bored with writing novels. I wanted to write for children and focus on that, children's stories and so on, and once in a while a non-fiction work. So I made that decision and even announced it, I think at some book launch somewhere that this is...
I feel like I was at that book launch at the Market Theatre. Fred Kamala interviewed you.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure it was that book.
Right. So this is my last novel and so on. This was not a gimmick on my part. I seriously thought it was, that I'm sick and tired of. Because even that novel, to complete it, because I was tired of sitting at my computer to write it. I thought maybe if I just dictate it and get somebody else to, it's just fortunate that the lady who had agreed to type it for me, who is a poet from the Eastern Cape, changed her mind or had other commitments and so on. Then I had to finish it myself. But what happened then was that after I'd made that decision, and I was very happy with that, and I was writing now, children's history, actually, or fictionalized history. An idea of a story came, set in Lesotho. It so happened that in Lesotho, there's a genre of music called Famu music, which is very popular in Lesotho, but in South Africa too, amongst those areas where, ethnic Basotho people are found. And the musicians there become popular figures to the extent that they would have these followers, the fan base, they call themselves followers, baladedi. And then there would be gang wars amongst the followers and so on. And the musicians, you find that have morphed now into gang bosses. When you hear they talk of illegal mining in South Africa, the actual leaders of that are the musicians, the Famu musicians. You see, they're the bosses because they've branched into things like that, illegal mining and they are gang warfares and so on. So when I heard this story, I was fascinated by it because it was very, very much reminiscent of what was happening in America a few years back, those East Coast, West Coast wars among the rappers, the rappers and MCs, in the hip hop culture. But in Lesotho, it was at a much larger scale. There in America, 1 or 2 people died. In Lesotho, I discovered that every weekend there are funerals of people who died from those gang warfares. And who are the leaders? The musicians, And I found that, I thought this deserves a novel. Because normally music, is something that you would think is uplifting and so on. Here is this beautiful music that I've known when I was growing up. It's poetry. It's a very poetic kind of music. It's actually poetry, recitation of poetry, you see. And, it results in all these depths and all that. I thought I should write that story. So I was dragged by those events back into writing a novel, Wayfarer's Hymns, that I never thought I would write. I thought I was done with writing novels. So after Wayfarer's Hymns, I decided that no, it's not very smart to declare that I'm done with writing novels. And I was correct, because now I'm busy working on the next novel after Wayfarer's Hymns.
Is this rickshaw?
Rickshaw, yes.
Can you tell us a bit about that?
All right. In fact, next week I'm going to Durban to research more and to interview some rickshaws and so on. I was fascinated. It's a novel that's been in my notebook for more than 10 years, the past 10 years. It's just that I was not getting time it needed, a little bit more research here and there and all that. And then I decided, well, I'm no longer going to write novels. Goodbye, rickshaw. There won't be any rickshaw anymore. And then I've just finished a book, on Chris, a biography, an authorized biography on Chris Hani, which will be coming out in November from Penguin. After finishing that book, that biography, then I thought, well, let me just focus on painting and so on. And then one day I'm invited by a very big, lover of my fiction who came all the way from England. And this was not the first time he did this. He would come from England just to talk with me and exchange ideas and all that. So I was telling him that, if I was still going to write novels, my next novel would have been Rickshaw. And then I tell him, about the rickshaw tradition in Durban, how it started, with this guy, I don't know whether he's a governor or what. I'm still going to read more about it, who he was exactly, but some guy there who went over to Japan, and saw rickshaws there and thought, this is a great idea to introduce it here. But then, you see, it evolved now there and became a culture, the culture among the rickshaws themselves, who developed their own practices, their own art forms, their own dances, and their own rivalries. So I was fascinated by that. This culture comes all the way from Japan. It comes here, then it evolves into a new, different culture altogether. And it has its art, it has its dance, and so on. It has its rivalries, people, fighting over territory, over the dance that, no, you stole my dance. That group of rickshaws stole. And then you find that their sons become rickshaws, and their sons, their grandsons. It becomes a family tradition. With customs now, a tradition in the true sense of the word. The tradition will have practices, will have, it's its own, subculture. And then there it happens. And of course, the main function is to carry people around, tourists. And then of course, as they do it, they carry them in their artistic, little carts or whatever you want to call them. And then they are dancing as they, and each is famous for their own dance and all that. And then freedom comes in 1993. And then people have developed a new attitude towards this practice. Whereas it was just a normal thing before, even black people would go to Durban to ride, so that I rode on a rickshaw. White people would go with their kids to ride on a rickshaw. Now it attained those political tones now. White people did not want to be seen to be riding on a black man. You see, it was not politically correct now, after 1993. Black people also did not feel comfortable riding on a black, those who thought they were politically conscious. Others continued to ride, those who didn't see any political connotation in that. But gradually, the rickshaw culture is dying in Durban. That is why now if you go, you might see one little rickshaw there, very thin and hungry, and with a very poor dance. It's no longer, you see. So the change, the freedom and everything worked in a very opposite way for them. It killed a tradition. It killed, a culture or a subculture that, was there and had its own forms of expression. So the novel then is based on that. Obviously, my main character will be a rickshaw, who's a descendant of rickshaws before, maybe even from the very, very first rickshaw, introduced by that white guy there, who was either a governor or whatever, and then, of course, the main thing, the change that has happened, how it affected it affected him and the rest of that tradition. So I'll go into those conflicts, of the rickshaws themselves, of the performances, and all that.
And the very interesting point about how that trying to do the right, morally correct, PC thing can destroy people.
Exactly.
Interesting.
That's the irony that the story spins up upon, that, you see.
You mentioned in passing that you've just written a biography of Khosani.
Yes.
And I know you've also written a memoir, am I right, of your own life?
Yes.
I'm interested because you're clearly a very creative person. The ideas are very ideas that come from within you and are very creative ideas. How is that non-fiction writing for you? Do you enjoy it in the same way, in a different way?
Oh, yes. Oh, definitely. I use the tools of fiction to write my non-fiction. You see, the only thing that will not be fictional are the facts themselves.
Okay.
Because when I'm writing non-fiction, it's very important that I keep to the facts. You see, but the narrative, I'm able to search for the narrative because all our lives are narratives. We are all characters in a story. You see, you are the main character in your own story, but you are also a minor character in other people's stories. You see. And you are also an extra in other stories as well. So, I mean, you know, and there will always be that narrative curve of the traditional, you know, because that's the kind of story I prefer, you know, this kind of story that follows that traditional narrative curve. So, in Chris Honey's life, it was there. There it was, you know, because he had those ups and downs, those plot points until we get to the climax. Unfortunately, his climax is death.
Shouldn't laugh, but the way you're putting it.
It is. You know, boom, then he's dead. And then we get out to that denouement, the resolution, you know, the fallout that happens then after that and all that. But that's when we are tying things together now. Yeah. Mm.
I want to go back to 2008. When a very irritating thing happened. It irritated me because Jeff Perez was my history lecturer at Rhodes. And this so-called plagiarism scandal broke about your novel, The Heart of Redness, which had been published in 2000, 8 years earlier.
Yes.
And some critic noticed that there were sort of similar passages between Perez's The Dead Will Arise and Your Heart of Redness, which you acknowledge in your book and which Jeff Perez had read and was completely happy with. And this person who, in my view, did not understand the concept of intertextuality, tried to accuse you of plagiarism and tried to get traction around that accusation. Can you talk about that period in your life? Was it a minor annoyance or does it still annoy you today?
No, it doesn't. Well, I mean, it should. But it was a minor annoyance even then. You see, at that time, I was an academic at Ohio University. And in America, they have no tolerance for things like plagiarism and so on. You lose your job completely, you know, because, you know, scholarship there is very very solid. And yeah, if there had been plagiarism there, definitely I would not have been, you know, I would have been let go. Sorry. Yeah, you know. So the university looked at that and found that no, in fact, there's no plagiarism. Because you see, those passages which it says are from Jeff Perez are not even passages. They are sentences, you see. And those sentences come from the original sources. In some instances, the Xhosa, then I translate them into English. Perez was very important, very crucial in my writing that novel, because he's the guy who was hired to be my consultant when I was writing a TV drama based on that's how I came to write that novel. That novel, okay, let me start from the beginning. I was commissioned by some producers, one of whom was Philip van Niekerk, who was part of the Mail and Guardian at the time. Maybe it was called Weekly Mail. I don't know if you know Philip van Niekerk. He was the editor. So they were creating a series called Saints and Sinners, or Settlers, Saints and Sinners.
Right.
In this series, historical characters were being tried in a contemporary courtroom for their historical sins. So they commissioned various writers. I remember they commissioned my cousin, for instance, John Machikiza, to write on, I think it was on Fervut or something. I was commissioned to write on Nonhause.
Uh-huh.
That's how then, And then they employed Jeff as my consultant. So we traveled with Jeff. We went there. He was very important to me because he pointed me out to primary sources, of the day, the newspapers of the day, the letters that people exchanged about these events. You see, some primary sources which were in the Xhosa language.
This is the cattle killing of the late 19th century, just for the listeners.
Yes. Around 1854 or around there. So obviously, he was my important source. There were many other sources, including my own heritage. Because non-Xhosa story is the story we grew up with, the story that we sang songs about, and so on. The beauty of Perez is that he was coming with an historical angle, a researched angle, rather than, the oral tradition with the legend, the myth, the magic, and so on. So I took that magic and then I took the history from him. He researched that thing. That book of his, The Dead Will Arise, was my important source. You'll see that. Yes. So obviously getting it from that source, I would, credit those sources, which I did. You see, if there was any plagiarism there, that book would not be in publication today. It continued to be published, continued to be read, it continues to be prescribed all over the world, in South Africa and in America as well. You see. So that tells you that a plagiarized book dies immediately. Mm-hmm. That is exposed, you see, and there are consequences for that writer. They will not reward it by making it, popular and so on, with all the plagiarism in it. So that is why that didn't bother me, because I knew that this, in fact, I've not spoken about this for many years, because it was a non-issue, definitely, for many people, for the readers, but also for the academic world, which is where, for me, it counted most, as an academic myself. Yeah.
Thank you.
On a slightly lighter note, Can we talk a little bit about writing for children? Because you've told us how when you thought you were stopping writing novels, you wanted to write for children. What is the difference in how you approach writing for children? What is the difference in process and how you feel about it and how you pitch it?
Well, I find it very difficult,
Okay.
Yeah, it's not easy. I've written for children before. I've written stories even for younger children. I remember I have a book, I co-wrote it with a friend of mine in Iceland, in Reykjavik, called Penny and Puffy, about puffins and penguins and so on. And those are the characters in the story. And it was published there in Iceland. And then I took that book many years later and donated it to some people here, to publish it for themselves, to use in their thing. So it is something that I've done before. And I wrote, some other book with my son, who was a graphic artist, called the Prels. The Prels are characters that we invented that live there. So it's something that I've done before. And then, of course, my latest was Arula, a journey into 10 ancient African civilizations. That's the history, going back 3,000, years back, the kingdom of Kush in the Sudan, then the empire of Ghana and Mali, Mapungubwe, and then Axiom in what is Ethiopia today, going back to all those ancient empires, but using a little girl from Johannesburg who is able to switch in her mind to travel to the past and visit those kingdoms and live with those people of different classes, so that to show how people lived during those times, different classes of people.
Very interesting.
I just wanted to ask you a little bit about the Zulus of New York and whether that story was purely inspired by the historical figures that you base it on, or did you have Sarah Bartman in any way in mind and her experience in mind? And also, what was your research process like for that book, evoking New York of the 1880s?
Okay. Sarah Bartman features in that novel, but she just featured a little bit here and there. It's a mention, really. No, it was not, she was not the inspiration for that novel. But then, since she had to deal with similar issues, I had to drag her into that story. The book was actually inspired by an academic paper written by a friend of mine who was an academic, who was a professor at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And the paper itself was titled The Zulus of New York. And he was writing about the Zulus that were in America in the 1800s, different kinds of Zulus who were there. Some of them were there for education, like the guy who founded the ANC. I think his name is John Langalibalele Dube. Others were there as performers. They were brought there as dancers and so on. Others were taken there by a guy whose name I forget now, but he features in my novel. He was a Canadian impresario. What's the name of this guy now? Who had these human circuses, that were very popular there. He would actually come to South Africa and take a few Khoi people or San people and so on. And then, of course, at one point he came to get a couple of Zulus. Although, of course, he only went as far as Cape Town, which is very likely that it was just some black people who were not really Zulus. But in his human circus, they became Zulus, So that academic paper then inspired that story. But also, fortunately, it has bibliographies and footnotes and so on, which led me now to the newspapers of the time. In England, for instance, when they wrote about this, in America, the New York Times and many other papers that wrote about these people, because some of these Zulus were there and there were many problems. Then they would go on strike sometimes, and then this would be reported in the New York Times. Then another Zulu fell in love with an Italian girl, which became a very big scandal, you see, and to the extent that it was in the newspapers. So stories, the newspapers of that period, the academic paper then, and of course, having to go back to New York, go to the archives, look at the maps of New York of that period, and the newspapers and the letters and all that, those became my sources to recreate the New York of the time, to also recreate the London all the time, to recreate the Cape Town all the time, because that's where my character, and then the Zululand all the time, the King Xhosa. You know, many things that I never read anywhere else. For instance, of how the king used to go to the toilet. You know, he would wear a British army uniform. Then when people see him walking out in that British uniform, they know that, he's going to poo now.
He put it on just to go and poo.
Oh, yes.
Oh, my goodness.
And the toilet was just a short distance from there of reeds, you know, the reeds that would encamp it, the thing, then it's a hole on the ground and all that. So when they saw the king wearing a British military uniform, they knew that, he's going to the toilet now. So all that.
I'm going to get totally distracted by this.
So I found that very interesting. And this was recorded by a woman who was one of the women of Isigodlo, as it was called. You know, the women at the court, at the king's court there, who then at some stage escaped from that life and then worked for missionaries and then was converted and learned how to write and told her story. The book is published by the University of KwaZulu-Natal. Even that book, I just found it by chance. I was visiting an artist friend of mine. There it was. You know, I read this book and said, the blurb and things. Hey, I'm actually writing a novel set during this period. If I had not read that book, the king and all that wouldn't have featured that much in my story. There would have just been a mention, you know. So many of the things, you know, are things that you just discover by chance. And you say, that goes into my novel. It was the same case with Sarah Bartman, you know, because those human circuses, she actually became one of them in France and so on, or in England and all that. So I read the stories then of the impresarios themselves and the owners of these human circuses and all that in order to. So you see, it's sources from many different places. And the maps, of course, help a lot, you know, because it's very important to have that picture when your characters move from one place to another. You must have the map all the time, you know. You must have pictures and things like that. You go into all that. Things which will never even feature in your story. You know, but you must have that world in your mind. So that when your characters move in that world, they will move in a credible manner. They will behave in a credible manner. You see.
Zakes, your novels were used to train AI, and I believe you have joined at least one of the class action lawsuits against the AI companies. I went and looked, and several of my novels were used to train AI. Gail, I don't know if you've actually checked.
I don't want to know. I don't want to know. I can't.
Yes. Yeah.
And this is something we could do a whole podcast on its own.
Yes.
But just one question. Are you currently feeling optimism or pessimism about where this incursion of AI into the world of the writer is going?
Yes. No, not really. You know, technologies have changed throughout the years. All this time, the storytelling and the ways that are used for storytelling evolve with the times, but storytelling remains. It adapts itself to the new technologies as they come and go. The printing press becomes the main technology for many years. It survives. Then, of course, we have other technologies now, the computers, then we have the internet, then we have AI. I believe that the storyteller throughout those will adapt to the new technologies as they evolve. So nothing scares me. I incorporate them using the honey book, but remind me to go back to that lawsuit, because this is a time, maybe the opportunity to correct some misimpressions out there. But the point that I'm making, when I was writing, for instance, this honey book, if I was writing it 10 years ago, I would have had to employ 1 or 2 research assistants who would have to travel to England, to Japan, to different places, but I would not even been able to locate some of the material, some of the sources that are in some of the most remote places where you wouldn't think you'd find something on Chris Hani there, or the Times of Chris Hani, or the ANC's activity, or the activities of some of the people, and the things they've been doing, and all that, you see, both beautiful and ugly and bad. You see. And the research assistant would have been doing all that. But with the advent of AI, I didn't have the need for that, because now AI is able to locate the sources for me. I'm able to get some source which is in some remote archive in Siberia that I would not have known about without AI. Even with the internet, I would not have known about it. But AI, and it depends, depending what AI you use. Some of them are so good that it gives you the sources, because AI is man-trained. As it was trained, it tells you where this source comes from. When it was being trained, where it gets this information from, and so on, you see. And therefore, I was able now to go all over the world while sitting in Rosebank here, where I now live permanently. Sitting there, then I'm able to get these sources. Okay, one time I had to go to some archives in America. It's called the Botswana Archive, where they had not put the things online, and therefore I had to read the papers themselves. But their existence was on AI, even though the paper itself is not there. So I know where to go, why I'm going there. So you see how important this AI was to me, and how I've incorporated it in my own practice. You see, it does not scare me. Yes, I know now that you can write a whole novel just feeding prompts into the AI. But at the same time, I know that there will be those readers, because you see, in the prompts you feed, at this point in time, of course, it can only write, according to the formulas that it has been taught. It's not AGI yet, that artificial general intelligence, where it will have emotions, and where it can think of on its own, without being trained to, We have not reached that stage yet. If we'll ever reach it, I don't know. But at this point, it's whatever it does and knows is human trained, you see. And one is able to harness it I'm able to harness it for my own purposes, you see. It is not a threat to me. It can write those novels, but the reader of my novels, I know that they will want to read my novel. They will not want to read that formulaic one that has been created by AI. I know, for instance, in South Africa, there are songs of some genres, such as my piano genre, which are completely created by AI, by a non-musician who will just feed prompts there and have the song. But people who love that kind of music know, this is clinically created. Yes, it is, but it's AI. We would rather listen to a song created by DJ Maiporisa or by whoever, because we can feel his hand there. You see, and his flaws, his rough edges, is not clinical. It's a work of art. You see, my novels will never be clinical. They will have those flaws. They will have those rough edges because they are human created, and my readers love them precisely because of that. You see, so I will always have that readership, that will prefer my novels to AI created novels. So to me, that's not a threat.
Zakes, what have you been reading or watching or listening to lately that's made an impression on you?
Man, because I'm very haphazard these days, I'm reading mostly things that are related to what I'll be writing next. And this is a lot of just bits and pieces of research material. A lot of the things I read will never appear in that novel, but they make me create the world of my story in my head, so that my characters are able to act in it, naturally, without me having to think hard about it. Why? Because it's a world I'm very familiar with. I've built it brick by brick. I have many things in that world. I've read about it. Things that will never get into my story are not related to my story at all, as long as they belong to that period. So I'm reading bits and pieces of stuff, rather than a single book as such. You see, things that will go towards. But I also watch a lot of podcasts, vodcasts. But now the word podcast here means both. Whereas, before, podcast meant podcast, audio.
Yes.
You see. I watch that a lot. I sit for the whole day following some of the cases, Malanga, and all that, but also the war in Iran. I go to sources that are outside the traditional media of America and of South Africa, because they report the same things from the same angle, from the same sources. They never go outside those sources, So generally, that's how I spend my day if I'm not painting, I'm just sitting there listening to this, but at the same time also thinking, incubating. This novel is incubating there, but I have my notebook. Remember, for the last 10 years, I've been putting notes that, this can go to rickshaw one day. How and where, I don't know, but I know that. Let me put it down. Some of the things in my note will never work anywhere, will never go anywhere. When I die, they'll just be there. Many of them actually do go somewhere.
Well, we very much look forward to the appearance of Rickshaw, and we are so pleased that you have not, in fact, stopped writing novels for adults.
Yes.
Zakes, thank you so much for your time. This has been absolutely wonderful.
It's my pleasure.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Zakes.
Thank you.
Gail, I'm feeling almost too overwhelmed to record this right now. My mind is buzzing. I'm feeling honored beyond what I deserve. That interview exceeded my expectations, which were already sky high. It was absolutely amazing.
It was incredible. I feel like I love all our guests. I'm inspired by all our guests, but every now and then I actually fall in love.
Yes.
And today I have fallen in love. His presence, he is electric. He is extraordinary. We have been in the presence of greatness. I'm going to get teary.
Gail, there was so much there. It's hard to know where to begin, but what did you take from it?
Like you say, so much there. But one of the things that really resonated with me, and maybe because it's nice when somebody like Zakes Mda says something you've said yourself, but what he said about we all the main characters in our own stories. Our children's generation, because they've grown up playing computer games, talk about NPCs a lot, non-playing characters. And I'm always saying they will describe people in their lives or people they see as NPCs. And I'm always saying to them, those people aren't NPCs in their own life. They're the main characters in their own life, and you are an NPC in their lives.
Yes.
And that's exactly what he was saying, that everywhere people are living out their story and their arc, and they are the main characters of their story. And I think that's something inherent in how a writer views the world, that we understand that everywhere stories are happening all around us, and that everyone is the main character in their story. So that really resonated with me. What about you, Fiona?
A piece of, I wouldn't even call it advice, but just he described the way he does things that I found unique. He was talking about maps, the importance of old maps in his research process when he's planning a novel, and how he looks at that overview of the character's world and works out which direction they would walk in, how long it would take them to get there, what is in the surrounding area. It gave me such an interesting bird's eye view on narrative, and it's really stayed with me. I'm always interested in authors who incorporate a visual element to their planning, like Carnita Loxton with her calendars. It's a very interesting way of looking at story. It's different to the way I do it, and I'm immediately thinking, how can I incorporate this into my own process? And I hope our listeners are as well.
I found everything he said about building that world in his head, and what the listeners couldn't see is he actually touched his head as he said it, and said, I build this world brick by brick in my head. And I kind of wanted to teleport into his head and be part of that world that he's built. I mean, it was just, like you said, it's almost we're doing this too soon. We haven't had time to absorb this amazing interview we've had. But yeah.
Incredible. We are so lucky, and I feel as though our listeners are lucky to be able to share this experience with us. I hope they will take as much from it as we did. So if you have any responses to Zakes Mda's incredible, huge body of work, or responses to this podcast, please get in touch with us. We're on all social media across the board, and we'd love to hear from you.
You've been listening to another production from Solid Gold Podcasts.